Hello everyone, today we're checking out this motherboard. Now this is a Gigabyte GA-P43-ES3G and it's a motherboard from around 2008-2009. And there's not much interesting about it. It has plenty of PCI slots in case you have PCI cards, PCIe 16X Gen 2, only one 1X, a couple of SATA 2 ports down here, some USB, a floppy disk interface, IDE. Around the side we have some more interesting ports like gigabit Ethernet, which is not bad for the time this was released, parallel, serial, SPDIF out, USB, PS2, you know, the normal situation. We also have a very ordinary 8GB of DDR2, and underneath this cooler you'll actually find we have a Xeon E5-5450. Now this is a server CPU from also around 2008-2009, which definitely is not supported by this motherboard. How is this working? See, back in the day, people had the same issue they have now. On the used market, you can get dirt cheap Xeon server CPUs for basically nothing, with really good performance. For example, this is a 4-core chip. And back then, of course, you didn't have AliExpress pumping out loads and loads of dirt cheap motherboards for these CPUs, like the X39, X99 boards. So instead what people did is they bought perfectly ordinary consumer boards. This is a relatively middle of the road spec board. And as the socket 775 on here is very similar to the socket 771 of this CPU, all they did was chopped a couple of pins off and added a custom BIOS. So now this CPU actually works in this ordinary motherboard. So let's try it out. Now when we turn the system on, we can start spamming delete to go into BIOS. And after it checks for SATA devices, we're in the BIOS. Now as far as I can tell, this BIOS is exactly the same as what ships with this motherboard normally, even though it has some modifications to allow it to run on these Xeon CPUs. And if we go into PC health status, I mean nothing looks that wrong in here. I mean it still has all the voltages and even the CPU voltage and stuff is still reading correctly. And if we go into the CPU settings themselves, again everything looks relatively normal. There's nothing that would suggest you have a completely unsupported CPU in this motherboard. Again, everything like power management is exactly the same. And there's nothing in this motherboard that actually tells you what your hardware is as far as I can see. So we could just exit out the BIOS, classic, and wait for the system to boot. Due to this system not supporting UEFI or something modern like that, we can't actually boot into modern Windows. So instead I'm booting into Ubuntu. You probably could still run something like Windows level with some modifications or something to the OS, but I couldn't be bothered, so we're just using Linux. And now we're in, and that wasn't too bad. I mean, it wasn't exactly fast by any means, but I have modern computers that are slower than this. And for a system from 2008, it's remarkably capable. It has 8GB of DDR2 RAM, which is barely enough. I mean, Microsoft is still selling computers with 8GB RAM, so I mean, if you want to go do some web browsing, do a bit of Firefox, you know, maybe you want to go do some shopping, let's go on Temu. As you can see, things aren't super fast, but they're really not too bad for what the system actually is. I mean, I only paid £10 for this. Anyway, maybe you want to do some office work, so let's go, I don't know, let's do some calculations. And again, things aren't that quick, but once they're loaded up, everything sort of feels fine, and you wouldn't have guessed how old the system actually is. So overall, I'm quite surprised how it performs. If we go to the browser and go and do a YouTube test, you see it does take a little bit to load. Go find the 4K video. Now I don't actually have the drivers installed for the NVIDIA GT720 that's in here, but we don't really need them because even with no drivers or anything, this thing can play 720p video at reasonably well, using about half the CPU, and it does also occasionally turbo all the way up to 3 GHz, and it's perfectly stable. You can sometimes you can bump it up to 1440p, and it runs fine. We can also, and yeah, even at 1440p it runs relatively fine, which is a surprise for such an old system, especially with no proper drivers. But if we try 4K, it does take a while to load. and it does get quite choppy. And you can definitely tell it's not perfect, but you know, for such an old system, I'm surprised it can manage this at all. And if you were wondering about the stability of the system, I ran it for a good couple hours, running at about half CPU load, and the system was perfectly stable. It just sat there and watched the YouTube and played WebGL Fish for hours, which is a surprise for such a janky system. I've had those Chinese AliExpress motherboards perform worse with the X99 CPUs. I've had those crash before, but this seems perfectly stable. Now, I bought this entire system as a combo on eBay for just about £15. I mean, that came with the motherboard, graphics card, RAM, CPU cooler, and for that I think I got an incredible deal. But I have absolutely no idea how the seller did the mod, or how they even flashed, or what BIOS they flashed. So, let's pull the CPU off and let's find out how they did it. There's a couple different methods I've seen online. One of them is to just place a sticker over parts of the CPU, which is the less destructive way. I've also seen people who go and just chop pins off the socket, which is a lot more permanent and destructive. So let's find out what they did. And now we can finally take the CPU out the socket without dropping it, hopefully. And we can see that on the bottom here we have stickers. If we look very closely at these two pins here, we have some sort of sticker modification. I can't quite see whether it's like bridging to another pin or something, but we do also have this massive sticker across it. If we look at the bottom, if we look in the socket, we can see that there's actually some bodge wires in here, from what I can see. Looks like they've gone across a couple pins. That's interesting. Looks like there's a piece of wire bridging out these pins down here. So maybe a bit of both. Let's put the CPU back in and see if this thing will ever work again. And yeah, somehow I didn't actually break it. The thing still boots just fine. Of course it's not actually turning on because I never connected the SSD. But at least it still works. I mean, this board being from around 2008, I'm also surprised that all of the capacitors are intact. I mean, I know this is towards the end of the capacitor play, but I still expect a bit of bulging or damage, but now they all look perfect. Overall, I quite like this board. I might use it for like an I/O server or something. It does have a nice parallel port. Or, I don't know. Bye.